Shola sat on the couch, staring at her hands as it trembled slightly. She couldn't tell if it was anger or something else. Her past always seemed to linger, especially when Mrs. Ronke was around. She disliked the woman with passion and would always treat her badly. As Mrs. Ronke wiped the water she spilled on the floor, Shola gave her a demeaning look. Just look at what you did. How can you be so careless? Are you out of your mind? Mrs. Ronke stood there, shock written all over her. Why are you staring at me like that? Shola asked as she got up from where she was sitting. She moved closer to Mrs. Ronke and emptied the cup of wine on her head. I don't know why you think you can stand there and stare at me like I'm a picture. Will you get out of my sight? Shola yelled at Mrs. Ronke, who quickly left the sitting room. As Mrs. Ronke sat on the chair in her room, she began to sob. She did not understand the sudden change in Shola's attitude towards her. She remembered when she just got the job. Shola got a new set of clothes, shoes, and even creams and deodorants. She wondered if she had said or done anything wrong to warrant such behavior from Shola, but she couldn't think of anything. Later that night, she went to Shola's room to see her, but she sent her away, saying she is busy. Mrs. Ronke had no choice but to leave. She believed that Shola might be going through a phase at the moment, so she decided to give her some space. She continued doing her job diligently, but Shola would always complain about everything she does. One morning, Mrs. Ronke woke up to find the new clothes, shoes, and other items Shola had gotten for her littered around the compound. Shola was at the balcony reading a newspaper and sipping from a coffee cup. She murmured good morning, but Shola pretended not to hear her. The gate man, Adamu, got to the scene, carrying a keg of fuel. He emptied it on Mrs. Ronke's belongings and set it on fire. Mrs. Ronke watched as the event unfolded and she began to cry. She sat on the bare floor screaming and asking Shola what she did to warrant such behavior from her. But Shola replied, you did a lot of harm to me, and there is no way you won't pay for them. You will pay for it, and I will make sure that you feel all the pains I felt, you heartless woman. Mrs. Ronke does not understand what was going on. I don't understand. What did I do to you? Why did you employ me only to ridicule me? What did I do to deserve this? I thought you said you would treat me like the mother and sister you never had, who has told you lies about me. Mrs. Ronke asked amid sobs, but Shola kept quiet. Mrs. Ronke went on her knees, begging Shola to forgive her if she has done anything wrong to her. But Shola gave her a long look and eased as she left her there. Mrs. Ronke burst out crying again. She recalled how she controlled over 15 staff before the death of her husband. Before her husband's death, he opened a very big supermarket for her and the business was doing fine. She became the market's women leader at a point and people feared her. She remembered how everything disappeared immediately after her husband's death. Her husband's younger brother arrived from the United States and he took all the house documents and cars. He left the house for the first wife and her kids and sent the other wives away. He claimed that his brother built his wealth with the money he sent and all the businesses belonged to him. Mrs. Ronke could not believe that she was building another man's business and her late husband never mentioned it. She was ejected out of the house and the shop taken from her. She rented a small one-room apartment with a small money with her and she started all over again. She has worked in many places, but people end up not paying her for her services. So when she met Shola, she believed it was an answered prayer and she did everything to make her happy. She literally changed her life for good. But right now, she doesn't understand why she changed towards her and treated her like trash. As she sat on the floor crying and watching the clothes burn, she decided that it was time for her to leave. She went back inside to pack her clothes and other things she brought to the house, inside the small bag. The tears kept falling from her eyes even though she tried so hard to control it. She went to meet Shola in her room to let her know that she was leaving. I'm leaving, ma. I need you to pay me my salary, Mrs. Ronke asked, her voice low. Shola looked at Mrs. Ronke strangely. and she busted into laughter. And who told you that you can leave? Have you forgotten the contract you signed last month? I don't understand. Why can't I leave? I thought you said the contract is for the shop you promised to open for me. Shola laughed again, followed by his. Madam, you are not going anywhere until you finish your 1 year without payment here. You are going nowhere. What? Mrs. Ronke exclaimed. Why would I work for that long and not get paid? What did I do to you? Stand there and keep asking me questions, okay? If I don't see my lunch in the kitchen in the next 1 hour, you will sleep in the police cell tonight. Mrs. Ronke stood there confused. She didn't bother to read the contents of the contract she signed because she thought Shola wanted to rent a shop for her as she promised. She simply signed it since she has promised to open a big shop for her to start a business all over again. Shola promised to help her start a business again when she explained that her husband's younger brother took the shop from her when he died. She quickly entered the kitchen and prepared Shola's lunch. Then later that night, she went to Shola again to ask her if she has done anything wrong for her. Mrs. Ronke, let this be the last time you ask me such a question. If you ask me again, I'll throw you in the basement and lock you up for days and no one will know about it. Mrs. Ronke was scared for her life as she heard this. She promised Shola that she would never mention it again. The days that passed were very challenging for Mrs. Ronke. She wondered why Shola would keep her in the house if she doesn't like her anymore. She also wondered if running away would work. But whenever she remembered how Shola threatened to lock her up, she would change her mind. One afternoon, a thought came to her mind. She recalled how Bola, her first husband's younger brother, visited months ago. She wondered if he had told Shola about her, but she did not believe he had told her because she still bought her some items after Bola's visit. Or had she found out? She asked aloud. Mrs. Ronke was Shola's mother. She left Shola and her two siblings when they were very little. She had to continue to disguise as a housemaid when she found out that she was her mother a few months ago when her ex-husband's younger brother visited. Uncle Bola had visited Shola when he saw Mrs. Ronke cleaning the sitting room. He kept staring at her as she attended to him. After his meal, he asked Mrs. Ronke if she knew him. She looked at Bola closely and found out he was her first husband's younger brother. Uncle Bola, what are you doing here? Mrs. Ronke stammered, feeling uneasy. I'm here to see my late brother's daughter. What are you doing here? Mrs. Ronke froze in shock as she heard this. She could not believe that she has been working as a house help in her daughter's home. She asked Bola to be sure. Are you telling me that Shola is my first daughter? She asked, stammering. It's a shame. You can't even recognize your own daughter. This is what happens when you abandon your children for money. It's really a pity. Bola gave her a menacing look as she got up to leave. Mrs. Ronke begged Uncle Bola not to inform Shola that she was her mother. She has always treated me right since I got here. If she knows I'm my mother, she might send me packing. Why would I do that? Uncle Bola asked. She even used to believe that her mother was dead, so it's not up to me to tell her you're her mother. Uncle Bola left and asked Shola to drive him to the car park. He told Shola on the way that Ronke was a mother who abandoned them when they were little, but he made her promise him not to tell Mrs. Ronke or anyone else. Shola froze as Bola said this. She could not believe that she had hired her mother to be a housemaid. What happened? I thought she got married to a very rich man. Well, we heard from her relatives that she was sent away when her rich husband died ago. She tried to come back, but your father sent her away too. It happened shortly before your father's death. Wow, this is unbelievable, Uncle. Did you know I always believed that she was enjoying her life somewhere? That has always been my thought. I also thought the same until your dad bumped into her younger sister who started bleeding on her behalf. She wanted to come back to your dad, but he refused vehemently, especially because of what happened to you one day. The mention of you one day in their discussion brought about an heavy silence. You one day's death was a tragedy, and no one wants to remember it again. Shola quickly bid her uncle goodbye and drove back to the house. That night, as Shola sat on the bed, She recalled their growing up years, the suffering, the stigma, and most of all, Yewande's death and their father's sacrifice. It was a cold afternoon and it was raining heavily. The family lives in a one-room apartment where they share the toilet and kitchen with 11 other tenants. Their father had gone to work and he comes back by weekend because of the distance between his workplace and where they live. He didn't have enough money to rent an apartment close to his workplace. Their mother, Mrs. Ronke, had left them when they were very little and she has never looked back for once. Shola and her younger brother, Femi, were in secondary school at that time. They were trapped by the rain and could not get home on time to stay with Yewande, who was 14 years old at the time. The rain continued for hours and it stopped late in the evening. By the time they got home, they found Yewande in the pool of her own blood, crying. A young bachelor who lived in the room beside him had taken advantage of Yewande since nobody was around. Shola called the attention of the landlady who cleaned Yewande up and asked her and her siblings not to tell anyone about it or she would be made an object of ridicule. Yewande was depressed for days and she was really scared of going to school. The bachelor who took advantage of her ran off before their father came back by the weekend. Months later, Yewande was washing clothes outside the house when she fainted. The landlady checked her and found that she was pregnant. She did everything to talk her out of abortion and encouraged her, saying it's not her fault. But Yewande could not bear the shame of carrying a child she conceived from rape. She took her life one day when she got back from school and her sister and brother met her lifeless body in their room. Shola let out a loud scream as she recalled the event. The memory had always been fresh like it happened the day before, and she has lived with the pain for years. How then can she forgive the one person who could have prevented Yuande's death if she had stayed with their father? Shola thought aloud as she sat on the bed crying. That night, she decided that she would let Mrs. Ronke go if she wanted to. For the past months, Ronke had held the woman who bettered her in silent contempt, harboring pain and resentment from scars she had never allowed to fully heal. The next day, Shola was hosting a few friends to celebrate a new position as the MD of her company. The evening was going on well until Mrs. Ronke came around to clear the table. A glass cup fell and shattered on the floor, and Mrs. Ronke apologized as she dashed away to get it cleaned. Shola screamed at Mrs. Ronke to come back, and she asked her why she's so careless and clumsy. After a long silence, Mrs. Ronke replied, "Why would you treat me this way in front of everyone?" Mrs. Ronke's voice cracked as she looked around the table, as if begging the others to understand. "What have I done to deserve this? I am your mother, Shola, and I know you already know, and that's why you are treating me this way." Shola looked away. "Get out, please. What are you talking about?" Her words were cold, though she could feel her friends judging eyes on her, and she could feel the anguish radiating from Mrs. Ronke's tear-streaked face. One of her friends, Tade, leaned in, a frown of confusion clouding his features. "Shola, what is going on? Why are you treating her like this? This is not you." Shola let out a bitter laugh. She didn't want to drag her friends into this twisted history, but maybe it was time they knew. Maybe it was time everyone knew why forgiveness was a luxury she could not afford. "When I was little," Shola began, "my father was a successful businessman. We lived a good life. My mother was, well, she was a good mother or so I thought. But then my father lost his job and suddenly the woman who had promised to stand by him started calling him names, belittling him for his bad luck." Shola's voice began to shake with the memory. "Instead of helping us, she left. Just like that. She walked away and married another man who could give her the good life. And she left us behind without a care in the world. I was just 7, and my younger ones were only 5 and 3. Yet she left." Shola paused, feeling a lump in her throat, but she pressed on. "My father became a broken man. He turned to alcohol, trying to drown the pain she left behind. But he still worked. He still fought, just to keep us going. But he died when I graduated from the university and after my younger brother gained admission into a university in the US. My father died from loneliness and from the pressure of raising three kids alone. He did not live to enjoy the fruit of his labor. Shola's voice was breaking at this point. Our friends' faces had gone pale and their eyes wide with sympathy. Shola swallowed hard. I became the mother and father to my siblings, especially after what happened to our younger sister. One day, while we were at school, she was raped by a man in our neighborhood. She did not know who to turn to. She felt ashamed, alone, and so scared. Shola's voice cracked, and she paused, forcing back tears. She killed herself. She was just 14. There was a stunned silence around the table as Shola's friends struggled to process the story. Mrs. Ronke's sobs grew louder now, but Shola's heart was hardened, encased in a wall of pain and betrayal. She turned to Mrs. Ronke. "You left us," Shola whispered, her voice trembling. "You weren't there when we needed you most. And now you come back into my life, calling yourself my mother, expecting me to welcome you with open arms? I don't think so." One of her friends, Tade, cleared his throat. "Shola, no one is saying what she did was right, but holding on to this anger is only going to hurt you now." Shola shook her head. You think I haven't heard that before? Everyone says forgiveness is freeing, and that is the only way to heal. But some things, Daddy, some things are too painful to forgive." Another friend, Remy, reached across the table, placing a hand on Shola's hand. "Shola, your pain is justified. No one can take that from you. But maybe forgiveness isn't about letting her off the hook. Maybe it's about setting yourself free from this weight you're carrying. You have worked so hard, Shola. You've built a life out of nothing. Don't let our mistakes keep defining you." Shola looked away, her gaze hardening once more. "Maybe one day, but not today." She turned back to Mrs. Ronke, who was still sobbing quietly, her hands clutched together in silent pleading. "Please leave," Shola whispered, her voice cold as steel. Mrs. Ronke took a shaky breath, slowly rising to her feet. She looked around the table at Shola's friends, her eyes full of regret and sorrow. Then, with a final glance at Shola, she nodded and left the room, the echoes of her retreating footsteps filling the silence that hung heavily in the air. As the door closed behind Mrs. Ronke, Shola felt a strange emptiness, a void where her anger had been. Maybe her friends were right. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a gift to Mrs. Ronke, but a key to Shola's own freedom. But the journey to forgiveness was one Shola would have to travel alone, and she wasn't ready to take the first step. Not yet. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, leave a comment, like and share to help my channel grow and enjoy more interesting tales. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.